Now, the situation in Ukraine, I should say, remains very tense. President Yanukovych has fled the country. The speaker is now in charge tentatively. There are real fears the country could descend into civil war. There are real fears, and the ambassador will talk about it, that Russia could send in troops to one part. The ambassador himself, though, I should also mention, he's facing his own protests about his role in this crisis there. Was he speaking for the Yanukovych government? Was he defending the Yanukovych government? I'll put questions. Does he feel responsible for the killings that took place? He has to also answer questions, and he will later in the program. But let's get to the politics here. Were Trudeau's comments offensive and ill-timed? And now will he apologize, as the Ukrainian ambassador wants him to do? What should Canada and the Allies do to help ease the crisis in Ukraine? In the foyer of the House, James Bezan, the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Defence, is here. Peggy Nash is the NDP's finance critic, and Mark Garneau is the Liberal Foreign Affairs critic. All of you, thanks for being here. Mr. Garneau, I got to start with you. Earlier today, you said Mr. Trudeau doesn't need to apologize for his remarks. The ambassador now says he should apologize. It's inappropriate for him to joke about it. Will he apologize?
There was absolutely no disrespect meant in his comment. And by the way, it was directed at Russia, not at the Ukraine. I think the record is very clear that we, since December, have been with the first Take No debate that came from the Liberal Party and are asking for sanctions, and the emergency resolution that we presented yesterday. I think it's very clear how seriously we take this situation, and I look forward. I look forward to meeting with the ambassador and hearing what he has to say about our emergency resolution, which we presented yesterday, as well as many other statements that we have made during the past few months.
But Mr. Garneau, the question is, Mr. Trudeau's own words are, "I'm trying to add levity to a situation." I'm quoting your leader. The ambassador says that's inappropriate when 82 to 100 people have been killed. Is it appropriate for Mr. Trudeau to be adding levity to a situation that some have described as a massacre?
Evan, if you looked at the entire clip, because you didn't show it all, there was another statement by Justin Trudeau at the end after Mr. Bigras spoke. You will see that our leader takes the whole thing extremely seriously, and our actions since December very, very clearly indicate that.
And but Mr. Garneau, to be fair, I mean, we've shown a fair bit of the clip, and but hang on, he may have realized that he said something later, but nonetheless, isn't he accountable for saying he tried to add levity to a situation when they're gunning down protesters? Is he going to apologize?
There was no disrespect intended, and it was not aimed at the Ukraine. It was about Russia. So let's make sure that we understand that very, very clearly.
What's the distinction?
And in the same comment,
I'm not 100% sure I see the distinction there.
Well, there is a big distinction, because we have been, since December, we have been showing Ukrainians that we care deeply about the situation. And you can speak to the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. They will explain to you that that the Liberal Party has stood up and spoken very much in favor of sanctions. We were the first to speak about that. We were the first to say that, and I said it on your program a few days ago, that the Yanukovych government is illegitimate and we need to go towards new elections. They know how seriously we take this situation. And in the comment that Justin Trudeau made, he said of a very serious situation. We recognize how serious it is.
You got to admit, Mr. Garneau, your comments, and I've had you on the program a lot, you've never made levity of the situation, the Russian response, Mr. Putin's response or not. Was that a gaffe?
No, it wasn't a gaffe. And I think the record speaks for itself, how our leader, who has spoken on this subject at other times, and our actions in the past 3 months show how seriously we take the situation.
Mr. Bezan, I heard Mr. Alexander. He thinks it shows a lack of judgment. The other question on this is this really an appropriate time to make politics out of the situation in Ukraine, to take this remark of Trudeau, to hold an entire press conference? Is it smart to make politics out of a situation when Ukraine's facing such a crisis?
I'm a Ukrainian Canadian, and I'm offended by the comments by Justin Trudeau. You just played the clip from the ambassador. who's also offended and said that they were inappropriate. You know, these type of flippant comments is no way to start developing foreign policy on the fly, and that's exactly what Justin was doing. And you know,
what do you mean by
this
that?
is,
Just with all due respect, he's not. I mean, Mr.
he-
Garneau's right. They've had a foreign policy. Are you elevating what may be a gaffe comment to a foreign policy?
Well, Justin Trudeau suggested that foreign policy in Russia is going to be based upon a hockey game. Give me a break. Like, this is just ridiculous that he made such a comment. And especially now that we know that this was actually done on Thursday night when there was people battling on the streets with the Berkut, the military police, the riot squads, and innocent people were getting shot under the direction of Yanukovych. And he made that type of comment. I think that is something that he does need to seriously consider. It is a lack of judgment. And I think it speaks loudly, not just here at home to Canadians, but especially to Ukrainian Canadians and to the people back in Ukraine. This is a serious matter, and one that deserves the greatest
proportion, though? Their question will be proportionality of response. Trudeau makes this response. He makes this comment, and he's, as a leader of a party, is responsible for it. But you've got Chris Alexander holding a press conference about it. Of all the things to talk about in Ukraine, is there a disproportionate attention on what Trudeau, the leader of the third party, said because of politics as opposed to the proportion of time we should be talking about Ukraine?
Well, I think it speaks about his lack of judgment. It speaks about his understanding of the situation on the ground. I think if he actually understood what was happening in Ukraine on Thursday night, he would never have made those comments. So is he even paying attention? You know, Mark can say that the Liberals really care about what's happening in Ukraine, and I appreciate some of the ideas that they have brought forward on behalf of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and other organizations. But, you know, what it really speaks to is this is a serious issue that requires serious people and serious dialogue, and making those types of comments are not helpful in any way, shape, or form.
Peggy Nash, what's your take on this? One, I mean, there's a couple issues. Are Trudeau's comments, do they merit the kind of proportional response? Should he have to apologize? And do you think they're being taken out of context because the entire Tout le monde parle clip of it has not been shown?
Evan, yesterday I joined hundreds of people at Queen's Park in Toronto, Ukrainian Canadians, people of Polish descent, people who descended from the Balkan countries, people who have had their own struggle to achieve independence, and they were there in solidarity with Ukraine, and there was a roll read of all of those who have died so far in this recent fighting in Ukraine. It was a pretty somber event, and that someone would make light of that kind of situation where there's this horrible tragedy taking place is very inappropriate. Now, I think Mr. Trudeau may want to apologize, or at least just clarify his remarks, because certainly what is happening there, and I know we all agree what is happening there is tragic, it is extremely serious, and deserves the highest level serious consideration and discussion. I know we've all been to demonstrations, we've all expressed our concerns, and it just seemed there was a real disconnect between the way people are reacting. Well, or at least apologize or clarify his remarks, because I think he very much misspoke to make levity of a situation where so many people have died. And I mean, this situation, as you know, is changing day to day, in some cases hour by hour, and there is real concern about what will happen in Ukraine over the next few days. Canada has an important role to play here, and I don't think we want to be misconstrued in terms of our level of seriousness.
What about the Ukrainian ambassador, Peggy Nash? Just very quickly, he's on the program later. I mean, here's a guy that had been on my program a number of times throughout the Yanukovych government's time, talking about the government, fundamentally, you know, speaking the government line. I mean, he's a bureaucrat, he's a diplomat, he's got to do his job. I appreciate that. Nonetheless, the Yanukovych government, now he's fled. They're gunning down protesters, and he was essentially defending them. He's facing protests on his own. When he demands an apology from a Canadian political leader, does he have any credibility to do that?
I would say no, he doesn't. I've certainly joined many members of the Ukrainian community out in front of and rallies out in front of the Ukrainian consulate in Toronto, and they were basically protesting through the consulate to the government. And so I don't think Canada needs to take lessons in democracy or civility or foreign affairs from the Ukrainian ambassador.
All right, I got a minute left here. There's a lot of situations going on. Mr. Garneau, he's not going to apologize. I appreciate that. But very quickly, now Yanukovych is gone. The situation is very fluid. The Russians have called this a mutiny. They've called this an act of terrorism. There are fundamental concerns about what Russia will do next. Very quickly, what is Canada's next step here?
Well, what we encouraged in the resolution that we adopted yesterday is that Canada speak very forcefully to say that it should be hands-off by other governments, that we recognize the interim government that's going to lead to the next election, that we should send 500 observers led by an eminent Canadian to those elections to make sure that they go properly, that the IMF needs to get involved here because Ukraine, as you know, is in an economic disaster mode at the moment, and they definitely need the intervention of the IMF. Right. And finally, that we don't forget about the atrocities that have been that have occurred here, and that we need to eventually identify those who committed them and prosecute them.
All right, very quickly, Peggy Nash, and then Mr. Bezan.
Yeah, I think we're in a very fragile period right now. There is real concern about the country splitting apart. And in the post-Olympic period, I think it would be very important to have a delegation, a top-level delegation from Canada on the ground in Ukraine. Our Foreign Affairs critic, Paul Dewar, challenged or requested today from the minister that we have a parliamentary delegation there. I think having monitors as well in place in advance of an election, making sure that proper procedures are being followed, but also monitors gathering information for any kind of potential criminal sanctions, I think, would be important as well. Canada has a special role to play, given our history with Ukraine. We really need, I think we need to show by the cooperation between our parties in the delegation that in spite of political differences, we can work together. That's certainly what Ukrainians need today, is to be able to work together.
Okay, Mr. Bezan, last word to you. Will Canada do anything else now that Yanukovych is gone? What's the next step?
Well, we're going to continue to monitor everything that's happening on the ground. We will continue to lead under the John Baird and Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who have been out front in bringing forward all the policies and sanctions ahead of all the other countries. We'll work with like-minded nations and our allies, especially the European unions, to ensure that those countries work closely with Ukraine. And it's really important at this point in time that we all respect Ukrainian independence, their right to self-determination, and that their boundaries and borders are respected for what they are right now.
All right, before I let you go, I just want to say I want to have you back to talk about the other situation. We're watching Ukraine very closely. We're also watching Venezuela. There's 18 people now, or 13 people dead, reports out of Venezuela now. Opposition leader Capriles has not met with President Maduro, who's been in power for 10 months. But the situation in Venezuela is also very dangerous and very fluid. We've got our eye on Venezuela. We've got our eye on Ukraine. James Bezan, Peggy Nash, Mark Garneau on that. And there's, of course, now the new element. It's become a political issue, the Ukrainian issue on Parliament Hill right now with the Trudeau comments. I appreciate all three of you coming up. I will have you back to talk Venezuela as well. We haven't forgotten about it.
Okay.
Thanks, Evan.
Thanks, Evan.